because it is indeed a very difficult situation for everybody. Yeah, it's very challenging to do something that we are not familiar with.
Apart from the curriculum, learning materials, and teaching media, another important aspect of education is assessment. And many people are still confused how to differentiate between evaluations, tests, and assessment. If I deal with assessment, then I will find numbers and statistics. In education, assessment plays an important role. The results of the assessment are very useful for teachers or anyone involved in education to improve the quality of education. And currently, I'm inviting a special person whom I haven't seen a long time. And she is a person who has many talents. She used to teach at one of reputable state universities in Indonesia, in a language center, that's Indonesia. And she was also, she became an online teaching specialist for Indonesian massive open online course. Now she's in England. She has earned a master's degree from Warwick University, but now she's taking her doctorate degree in Lancaster, England. Now I would like to address and say hello to Mbak Santi. Hi, Mbak Santi. How are you?
Hi. Hi. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
All right, I'm fine, Mbak Santi. Well, we've seen so long time, Mbak Santi. Now, please tell me what you've been doing in England. And where are you now, Mbak Santi?
Okay, I'm in Lancaster. I've been here for, I think, almost 2 years. So this is my second year of my PhD studies. So yeah, I've been studying basically.
Would you tell us about Lancaster?
And enjoying the summer.
All
yeah.
Right. What about Lancaster? What does it look like? Because we just heard from TV,
Well, it's a very, very small town. It's very, I think it's a kind of ancient town. It's got a castle, not far from where I live. So it's probably like 5 minutes walk from where I live. It's, it's a very small town. Unlike Jakarta, for example, or Surabaya.
Yeah. So it's a good place for everyone to study. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
All right, Mbak Santi, now I'd like to ask you a question, all right? Okay. Now, my first question for you, Mbak Santi, what is the meaning of assessment and why do you think teachers need to do an assessment, Mbak Santi?
Right. Well, I think assessment is about gathering information about our student learning and then processing it or making sense of this information so that we can give them meaningful feedback on what they've done well and what they need to do next, especially I think in the context of sort of closing the gap between where they are currently and the learning objectives. And also, assessment should feed into or give feedback to ourselves regarding our teaching. And oftentimes, assessment is also important because we want to inform relevant stakeholders, for example, parents or perhaps the school authorities, and about why teachers should do assessment. Well, I think because assessment is an integral part of learning, of teaching and learning, so of course we need to do assessment in order to fulfill our duty as a teacher or educator. I don't think we actually teach if we don't assess. So of course we have to assess so that we can we can actually teach. Learners need to know how well they've done or how they're doing in relation to the learning objectives. And that's why teachers need to collect information so that they can inform learners about their progress and what they need to do next to close the gap between their current condition and the learning objectives. And also, we as teachers, we need to know whether our method or our strategies actually work. Because I think teachers, we like to experiment with different methods, different strategies or techniques, or simply activities. And of course, we want to know like which one works, which one doesn't, or why this particular activity doesn't work with this particular group of students, for example. And also parents want to know the sort of the progress or the performance of their children. So it's important for us to collect that kind of information so that we can evaluate our own practice and give information to the relevant stakeholders.
So there are a lot of advantages that we as educators need to be fully aware of regarding assessment, yeah, Mbak Santi, for parents, for ourselves as teachers, so the result of assessment can improve the quality of the teaching. And as you said, some things about experimenting teaching methods, so we will be able to know, oh, this method is going to be effective and the other is not effective. Now, Mbak Santi, knowing that assessment is important, would you like to tell us the principles of good assessment?
Okay. The principles, I think I'd like probably to start with something a bit kind of general about assessment in general. I think the most important thing is it should involve meaningful feedback, which inform students where they are now, how well they're doing, and where they need to go next, and how they need to go next. Again, as I said earlier, it's about closing the gap. And also it's important to convey this kind of feedback in an accessible way, in a way that our students will understand. And also I think it has to be done timely, it has to be done at an appropriate time during the learning process, so it has to be planned. And as with everything, I think clear instructions are very important. Well, it's definitely probably not just specific to assessment, but instructions are always important. But in the context of assessment, for example, let's say we want to do, you mentioned about assessment for learning. So for example, we want to do, let's say, peer assessment with our students. I think it's important to show them how to do it, because it can be a totally new type of thing for many students. They may not understand how to do it. Also, they may not understand the value of this kind of activity. They might think how much better I am than my peers to be able to evaluate their performance. Or they might also think, why should I trust my friends' feedback and comments? How much better they are than myself, for example. So sometimes it's also important to inform them the value or the rationale for the type of activity that we're doing. And I think on a related note, I'd like to add also the principles of good tests or testing, because again, like what you said earlier, tests are part of assessment. Well, I think it's not something new for many teachers. For good tests or testing, we need to have validity, but I think validity is often viewed as the property or the quality of the test or the instrument. Well, actually, in the sort of more modern view of validity, validity is actually not the property of the test itself. So we can't really say this test is valid or this test is not valid, because it's not actually the property of this particular test. Rather, validity is viewed as the sort of the validity of the interpretations or the use of the test results. Yeah. So for example, a student takes an academic English test and then receives a score of, let's say, 6 out of 9. So the question is, what does this score actually mean, and what kind or level of abilities in academic English in particular that this person actually possesses? So this kind of interpretation that should be validated, not just the test instrument itself. And for example, if this test result is used to say, or for example, university admissions, should we consider that this person has met the requirements? Should we trust this score of 6 in this test, for example? Again, this kind of use that should be validated. And then that's validity, and we've got reliability, which is related to scores and scoring processes. And I think now it can be, or it is often viewed as part of validity. They call it like scoring validity, for example, because at the end of the day, reliable scores contribute to valid interpretation of test results. And then you've got impact, or I think a lot of people probably call it washback, or washback effect. So a good test or testing should have positive impact on teaching and learning. And we've got fairness principle. So a good test or testing system should be fair, shouldn't advantage or disadvantage certain students or student groups. And then I think finally, because of course we want to achieve all these ideals, but then the question is, do we have adequate resources? Then comes the principle of practicality. So we need to measure our resources, the available resources to us to achieve all these things.
This is very interesting, yeah, Santi. So validity should be viewed in a new ways, meaning that we should be taking into consideration about our interpretation with the result of the test. It's not solely related to the property of the test itself. And you also mentioned about washbacks, and we can know the effects, right? So whether the result would give positive or negative effects to those who hold the test. Well, this is quite interesting, Mbak Santi. You've mentioned some principle. Now everybody goes online, Mbak Santi.
Yeah.
Considering the fact that there are some principle for us, we have to look into. So my question to you is that, do you think it is still possible to grasp, to take into consideration all aspects of good assessment, just like what you just mentioned in online assessment, Mbak Santi? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think the current situation is more like emergency situation,
Right.
Because we didn't really have proper preparation. Like teachers and students had to move online overnight, sort of, or instantly.
That's
right. So they were not really prepared for that. I think it depends, because I mean, assessment is very broad, but when we're talking about classroom assessment, for example, yeah, I think it can be done online, and I believe like it has been done online. Many teachers have done it online, and for example, as you said, like assessment for learning, because assessment for learning usually takes the form of questioning or observation, peer assessment, self-assessment. These types of activities are sort of embedded usually in the instruction or in the lesson. So if the lessons are delivered online, that means, yes, the assessment activities can be done online as well. But then the question is more perhaps about, what about like tests? Can we just move the tests which were originally a paper pencil test to sort of online platform? I think in principle, yes, although of course you need to make some sort of adjustments or modifications really. Yeah, but it's possible. And again, I'm sure like a lot of teachers have done online testing as well. Although maybe again, if we go back to the principles that I mentioned earlier, there are things that can't really be ideal. Again, it's an emergency situation, far from ideal. Yeah.
So by saying that, do you think high stakes test is not possible to do, Mbak Santi?
Okay, so for high stakes tests, I think it's a bit different from classroom tests. Well, about online testing for high stakes tests,
yes,
I think I need to clarify first what is meant by online testing, because I think there are two different sort of meanings. The first one is a test which is administered online, but test takers need to come to a secure location or test center. That's also called online testing, and that's not, in fact, that's not something new. There are tests which were designed to be administered online, and it has been administered online from the start. I think that's not a big problem. But I think we're more interested in the second type, where it's delivered online and test takers can take the test from their home or virtually anywhere, and it's supervised remotely.
The second one.
The second one, right? Yeah. I think because of the needs, really, for example, for university admissions or maybe school leaving exams, it has been made possible. Okay. It has been made possible. I think some exam boards have sort of moved their paper pencil tests to an online platform, or some of them, they have moved their already online tests, which in the past were sort of administered in a secure location at a test center. They have to move this kind of tests to the, I think they call it like at-home testing or remote testing. So yeah, I would say it has been made possible. So I guess in principle, again, it's possible. Although certain precautions or again modifications need to take place to make sure that again the interpretations of the results will remain valid, and also the administration itself and the results will be fair, because students may have different devices, they have different sizes of monitor, for example, or different, computer specifications, which might impact on the delivery of the test, or different internet bandwidth, or that kind of stuff. So yes, there are certain things that need to be done, certainly, to ensure that test administration is sort of good, so that the interpretation of the test results will remain valid. Yeah.
That's right, Mbak Santi. All right, Mbak Santi, this is going to be my last question to you, Mbak Santi. Please convey motivational words, Mbak Santi, to educators about what they should prepare during the pandemic related to assessment, Mbak Santi.
Okay, related to assessment, I think, well, first of all, I think there are teachers who have sort of shared their best practice or sort of their success stories. So I think teachers can learn from one another. first of all, because again, it's something new. Everybody is learning as they are doing. So I think it's good to support one another, to share what they've done and they've found successful. And also, again, of course, think about the practicality principle that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes, of course, we want to be ideal, like, okay, it has to be this, it has to be that, but also we need to take into account things like available resources on the part of our students. Whether, for example, if we want this kind of test, whether you think your students will be able to access it, whether it's going to be fair for them to demand this kind of participation, for example. So
I've learned a lot today from Mbak Santi that there are some principles that we can put into our consideration, like validity and then reliability, and also aspects, and also practicality. And especially now we are in pandemic, so we cannot satisfy all principles, maybe, Mbak Santi, yeah, because of this current situation where now we are in an emergency condition. And Mbak Santi mentioned that now let's the time, why don't we help one to another, right? Is that right, Mbak Santi?
Yeah, well, I think for teachers,
Yes.
If it's classroom-based assessment, it's not like
Classroom-based
high-stakes
yeah, that's
test.
right.
I think they shouldn't worry too much. Because again, I guess the test results or the assessment results or outcome will not be used to make important decisions, really.
Yeah.
It's more about to inform their own practice and to inform their students about how well they've done. So yeah, I think they can be more flexible. I think it's harder for other contexts, for example, in high stakes testing. But I think for teachers, I think, yeah, if it's classroom-based assessment, they shouldn't worry too much. Of course, they still have to do assessment. And I suppose they still have to conduct things like, what do you call, like semester tests, or something like that, of course, yes. And they can, I think like a lot of paper pencil based tests can be moved online, of course with you know, you need to learn a bit about the technology and stuff, but it's possible. I think what they need to consider first is like how high the stakes are. If it's not high stakes, I think they shouldn't worry too much about it. So they need to think about what kind of decisions that will be made on the basis of the assessment results. Yeah.
So the context is different, yeah, Mbak Santi. So
Yeah.
teachers, you should not be worried, okay? You have to take care about yourself also. During the pandemic, you have to be healthy now.
I think the most important thing is really to be kind to yourself and your students, and also perhaps their parents, because it is indeed a very difficult situation for everybody. Yeah, it's very challenging to do something that we are not familiar with without proper preparation. So really, like, be kind to yourself and to your students, and support each other in these difficult times. Really, I think that's really the most important thing.
That's right, and we do hope that the pandemic is going to be over, Mbak Santi. And you will be back to Indonesia, and we are going to meet you, Mbak Santi.
Yeah, I hope so, yeah.
So thank you very much, Mbak Santi, for this wonderful interview.
Yes.
And stay healthy, Mbak Santi.
Okay.
Goodbye, Mbak Santi.
Bye.